Welcome to Women in the Arena podcast, the podcast celebrating women doing extraordinary things in plain sight. I'm your host, Audra Egan, and our mission is to elevate the value, strength, and resilience each woman brings to the world. Without further delay, let's go ahead and start the show. Welcome in, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me again this week. This week, my guest is definitely rockstar status. As a matter of fact, if she wasn't so amazingly kind, I would be super intimidated right now. But she immediately puts you at ease. My guest this week is Julia Gordon, and she is the Assistant Secretary for Housing, and she is the Commissioner of HUD. Here comes the intimidating part. She was appointed by President Biden, and she was confirmed by the U.S. Senate by May 12th, 2022. Let both of those things just sink in for a minute and appreciate that I'm mildly freaking out right now, but in a good way, She is also an incredible wife and mother and a Harvard graduate of both her undergrad and her Juris Doctorate. It is both my pleasure and my honor to introduce to you Julia Gordon. Julia, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
It is my pleasure to be here. I'm so excited that you do this podcast, and I could not be more honored to be a guest on it.
I am giddy. I have been so excited that you said yes to be on this show for about the last 2 months that I've hardly been able to contain myself. So I am so excited that you're here. For those that are not industry geeks like you and I are, can you explain to the audience what you do?
Sure. So at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, there is an office called the Office of Housing. That is the largest office at HUD, and it includes the Federal Housing Administration, which has single-family, rental, and healthcare portfolios. And it also includes HUD's assisted rental development work, along with our senior housing and housing for people with disabilities. It includes our work on manufactured housing, as well as our Office of Housing Counseling. So it's a very large office, about 2,500 people. My title is Assistant Secretary. I also have that second title of FHA Commissioner, which is kind of a subset of my work. And I am a political appointee, which means my time here runs with the time of the president at any given time. Right now, that's, of course, President Biden, which means, I'm here through the end of 2024, and whether I'm here any longer depends on the 2024 election.
So it depends on voters, basically.
It does. And not only do I take my position at HUD very seriously and my obligation to the millions and millions of families and communities that we serve, but I also am very proud to be a member of the Biden-Harris administration and to be part of trying to put the president's vision into reality more broadly.
So you're a big deal. You are a very big deal. And whether anybody realizes it, and regardless of political affiliation, you work hard for every single homeowner and renter in the country.
I do. I work hard for, anybody who cares about housing, even the parts of housing that my office doesn't itself oversee. We believe we have an important voice on important issues such as tenants' rights or the importance of home ownership for families and communities. There are lots of homeowners who will have a mortgage that isn't FHA insured, but we care about them too. There are many renters who might not live in HUD assisted properties, but we care about them too. We really consider ourselves the center of gravity for caring about housing.
This is the cornerstone of, I would say, most families, that you want to have a safe and stable housing situation to live in. And I wanted her to explain that all to you because I wanted you to understand the magnitude of her role. But as I explained to you in the beginning, the thing that made the biggest impression on me was her unwavering commitment to her values and her principles. So she took what some people would consider an unconventional path to the role that she's in now. Julia, I would love for you to share with the audience your journey to your current role, because it's such an amazing and dynamic one that, like I said in the beginning, it made such an incredible impact on me. I want you to share it with everyone.
Well, thank you so much for caring about my backstory. Most people just want to know what policy decisions I'm going to make next. It's really a pleasure to get to reflect on my own journey here. I'm 59 years old, so I'm not going to really cover, all of those years. But there are a few things that I think it's important to me to share with people about my journey here. And one has to do with my professional values, and the other has to do with my commitment to family. From a professional perspective, I have known since I was very young that I wanted to work in public service or in the public interest. To be honest, it has never, even as a young person, I wasn't exactly sure why everybody didn't want to just do that, because it felt so natural for me. I had, my family of origin had some tough times where we relied on other people to help us. And it always seemed natural that what I would want to do is be a person working to help others. And so professionally, when I came out of in law school, I did quite a lot of work to provide civil legal assistance to people who couldn't afford an attorney. I very much enjoyed that work. I did some work at the time for renters, helping represent them in situations where they were being evicted. And I also did quite a lot of work with prisoners, not working on the criminal side of figuring out whether they were guilty or innocent, but working on things like the conditions in the prison and the disciplinary systems within prisons. And all of that work was both enjoyable and meaningful, and cemented my desire to work in a public interest capacity in my career as a whole, which I did do. I worked in the legal aid field for a number of years. And when I was in my early 40s, for reasons we'll talk about when I get to the family part, I somewhat reinvented my career and decided I wanted to move from that more individual representation kind of work to policy work, to try to look at the systems that I knew were broken out there and see if there were bigger picture ways I could make a difference for the entire system. It's like that story about the people walking down the river, and there are these men walking down next to a river, and one of them sees babies floating in the river and jumps into the river and starts pulling the babies out of the river. And turns to his friends and says, "There's so many babies here. Come help me pull them out." And one of his friends just takes off and starts running. And he says, "Where are you going?" And the guy says, "I'm running up to see who's throwing these babies into the river." And that little parable has always moved me, felt like something that I needed to do in my career also. And so I began working on federal level legislative and regulatory issues surrounding consumer finance. When I started doing that career, it was right before the 2008 financial crisis. And I pretty quickly found myself pulled into working almost exclusively on mortgage related issues and then on foreclosure related issues, and became extremely involved and worked for a place called the Center for Responsible Lending, which was a nonprofit that focused exclusively on consumer finance issues. From that job, I moved into a public service job at the Federal Housing Finance Agency, where I continued to focus exclusively on mortgage-related policy. For family reasons, it was not the right time for me to be in a government job then. So I went back out to the nonprofit world, continued to focus on the same issues, ended up becoming the president of a small nonprofit organization called the National Community Stabilization Trust, where we worked on taking distressed homes in underserved communities and putting them back to productive use, really focusing on home ownership, but also working on affordable rental. And that's where I was when the president's team asked me if I would be interested in the Assistant Secretary of Housing job that I have now. A very non-traditional path to this position, because most people come out of the industry, a developer or someone who is working in the mortgage lending industry itself. And so I felt so excited and grateful that this administration recognized the value of all the work I had done from the consumer advocacy side, and how an understanding of how laws and rules impact people and communities would really help me in the job I have now.
And I want to pause you there for a moment, because I want to place a footnote here and remind everybody that I said in the beginning that she got both her undergrad and her Juris Doctorate degree at Harvard. She could have named her price anywhere. She could have gone anywhere. She could have done anything. She certainly could have made a whole bunch of money. But she chose nonprofit because she was committed to making a difference and changing the world. I think that's one of the things that drew me to Julia, besides her being insanely kind and have a wicked sense of humor, because she is in on the joke of Commissioner Gordon. So just in case anybody's putting those together, she is in on that joke. She didn't compromise. She's a world changer, and she stayed committed to that vision. And it led her to a call from President Biden. So before we discuss the family aspect of this, I want to ask you what that phone call was like. I mean, how did that feel when you're receiving an inquiry about, hey, would you like to come work for the president? In essence, that's what you do. I mean, I would have been, first of all, looked at the phone and said, is this a joke? And then after I realized that it wasn't a joke, I would have been probably mildly or not so mildly freaking out. So what was your experience?
First of all, obviously, everything that has happened, I'm incredibly honored by and grateful for. But the story's a little bit longer and maybe slightly less dramatic, which is I was tapped to be part of the Biden-Harris transition team, which is a group of people who come together right before the election happens to be ready to hit the ground running if we end up changing from one president to another and everything needs to be switched over within the whole executive branch. So there's a team of people that gets assembled. I was on the housing team, of course. That call, the call to ask me to be on the transition team, was the one where I think I was the most surprised and delighted and excited and so honored that anyone thought I could add the value to what was an insanely talented group of people I worked with on housing as a whole. And that work laid the groundwork for my coming to this job because I actually had to take an unpaid leave from my regular job. And as you've noted, having spent my career primarily in nonprofit, I don't have the giant bank account somewhere that I draw on when I do things like unpaid leave. But I think the world should know that the people who do things like this often really sacrifice to do it. Everybody on the housing transition team, what some people used to call the landing teams, but we didn't call it that because it had kind of a little too warlike language there. But everybody who does this out of deep commitment to the public interest and to public service and doesn't get paid to do it.
I never knew
And
that.
so my experience, yeah, I mean, most people don't. Why would you know that? There's a core staff that does get paid, of course, that do it sort of professionally, but the teams that come in and really understand what's happening at each executive agency and what rules are being worked on and what issues are predominating and what balls need to not be dropped in that transition between two administrations, that is largely a volunteer workforce. And they are usually the top people in their field. And it is an incredible service for anyone who takes it on. So I had the good fortune of being part of that amazing team, still one of the most wonderful and tight and collaborative groups I've ever worked with. And so I will be honest, once you do that, you do know there is some possibility that you will be offered a job within the administration. So, the big excitement for me and the time where I turned to my family and said, wow, can I really do this? Can we afford it? Can I afford the time? Because transition, much like the job I have now, is very, very demanding work. And, is it the right time for our family? How are we going to swing it financially? And so that was a big decision for me. But I kind of always knew I knew where I wanted to land. I just needed to make sure my family was okay with it. When a few months after the transition, I did get the call specifically offering me this job. Or, I interviewed, offering me the opportunity to interview, etc. That was not out of the blue for me, but I will admit it also was still one of those breathtaking moments of my life.
Did you take a moment to savor it and realize, wow, what I do and what I have done made a difference?
I always try to take that moment. I remember great advice I got right before my wedding. A friend said to me several times during this experience, just like take a time out and look around and appreciate everybody who's there and what's going on. And that was great advice for my wedding. And it was such good advice for my wedding. I've tried to put it into practice in other parts of my life. And definitely that moment was one of those moments.
I would say, and I am very encouraged by that, because that you got that advice early on in life. I wish I had. I have over the last couple of years learned to take a breath and appreciate the small victories along the way, uh, because we're always in such a frenzy, especially as women, that we're always on the rush to go on to the next task, the next challenge that you needed to conquer. And I'm guilty of that. Absolutely guilty of that.
It's so important. And there's something I'll add, which I know comes up for a lot of professional women, which is to make sure that moment is not a moment of either thinking that you're not worthy or that you are not enough for the position. And it has taken me many years to work on making sure those are not the default things that I think about.
What you just said actually made my chest tight a little bit in a good way. And the reason why I say that is because I struggle with that. And I know many other women that struggle with that, especially ambitious women, that we're always thinking, are we enough? Are we good enough? And the reason why that gave me a suck in my breath moment when you just said that is because of your position and your journey. Even you have those feelings, which means that we're not alone in those feelings and we have lots of company. And your reminder to push those feelings away and that you absolutely are enough, I don't think that we can say that often enough. So I appreciate you being vulnerable and saying that out loud for us all to hear that, because that means something and it's meaningful to me personally. And I know that it's meaningful to the audience. So I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for being that vulnerable to tell us that. Julia, why don't you tell us a little bit about the family aspect of your commitment and your unwavering foundation of making sure that you understand what is important and making sure that that is your true north.
Well, thank you for that question. And it's one that I don't get to reflect on often because we don't usually talk about this at work or in the work context. Every person has a very individualized story, and no one person's path is going to work necessarily for another person. I can't say that at any point in my life I set out to have a particular path or thought of myself as having particular bright lines or red lines that I wasn't going to cross. Honestly, I didn't think much about anything at all. The first time I remember thinking about work and family was when I was a single woman and was involved at my workplace in lots of conversations about women and their place in the workplace and scheduling and life work balance. And almost all of those conversations took place exclusively within the context of childcare and how taking care of children could be accomplished while in a professional job, in my case, as an attorney. There was a time where I felt very resentful that the work-life balance conversation was only about children, because surely there were other things that needed to be balanced too. And not just for women, but for men also. Some people had very strong commitments to an outside hobby. I personally am very involved in my synagogue, so that takes time, and there are a lot of time-based commitments around that. Other people might have elder care or other kinds of responsibilities that aren't childcare. So I always felt like there were so many different things that each human being has to figure out how to put their heart and soul into along with their job. Back in those days when I was single, I thought a lot about that when I would think about this topic. But I did not get married until late. I was 37 when I got married. We can make jokes here about the people who forget to get married or forget to have children. But the fact is, everybody knows that the way things are today, if you are working hard and trying to get ahead, and if you are committed to your work, if you are ambitious I mean that in a good way, not in an appropriate way. Sometimes you do find yourselves without the time to date, or this was before you could just swipe right. And so when I got married, it was at a time where most of my friends, many of them had already been married and had children, were stepping up to a next level in their professional development. As I entered that period of my life and became pregnant and had a child when I was 40, that seemed like absolutely the wrong time to, quote, lean into my job. It was really, really important to me to focus on the family that I hadn't been sure that I would ever get, to be honest, when I was a younger person and working those long hours. And I was very grateful for it. And I took some time to really spend with my daughter. Partly I'm glad I did because it turned out that the shop closed up after that one, so I have only one child. I spent a few years working from home as a consultant. Now, I was working full time and I did have a babysitter who came to the house, but I got to be home and I got to see my daughter a lot and really enjoyed that time in my life, but made a very conscious decision to step off the career trajectory that I had been on. And I was very fortunate that when I felt ready to step back in, that I was able to find, I guess, what we now call an on-ramp. I was especially grateful to find an employer who understood both that why that on-ramp was necessary, and also understood not only the transferable skills I had from my previous jobs, but the skills that people develop in parenting, particularly the people who are the primary parent, I think those skills are very important in the workplace too.
Expand on that a little bit, because I would agree, because being a parent is hard. It is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. But what skills in particular do you think that we underestimate that we really should bring more to work?
Okay, this might sound funny, and if my daughter ever hears this, I hope she doesn't take this the wrong way. But it having a child, you learn so much about what is out of your control, what is completely out of your control, and how to manage around that. You also learn about how human beings can view the same situation or matter in a completely different way, and that the only or that the way that you have to work with other people is to fully understand and respect that.
And you learned that through raising your daughter.
Yeah, like I don't want to say, I mean, I had been a manager for years in the workplace. It's not like I hadn't read books on, how to manage somebody whose Myers-Briggs type is different from yours. I mean, I had a lot of training in that area, but I will tell you that I feel like parenting, and look, honestly, being in a being in a marriage or a partnership with another human being brings out some of the same qualities. But for me, maybe just because my daughter as a young person was a very, very different personality than I was, it wasn't anymore just a question of my trying to intellectually understand how to deploy that skill in the workplace. It became more automatic and more of a part of me.
So, what have you learned about yourself that has surprised you uh, through your work and through your child rearing? What has come up that you thought, that's interesting?
Well, I'll start by saying that's an incredibly hard question. And I'm always very impressed by people who can actually answer questions like that. But I'm gonna give it a shot, which is the most important thing I've learned is that I don't have to be perfect. All of us who work in jobs that require leadership and creativity and hard work and long hours have to reach that point of understanding that, because there's no way you can be perfect and still do your job. But it is an important part, I think, of any trajectory to to make sure that if you know that you are doing your best to follow your true north, and that is your own personal mission, values, vision, that there are always going to be mistakes along the way. Not everybody is going to like you. In this job, there are already plenty of people who may not like me. Jobs like this require making difficult decisions about matters that affect literally millions of people. And they are tough decisions to make, and they are stressful, and not everybody is on their best behavior every day of the week, depending on what's going on. There are moments where you might have some interpersonal misstep with somebody, or where you may make make a decision substantively and decide later, hey, maybe I missed that call and should turn around and reverse that. And you have to always have the humility to know you might need to change your mind if it turns out you're wrong. We're all wrong a fair amount.
I think having that sense of self, a strong sense of self, and being aware enough to say, I was wrong and let me correct it, is a superpower, because not everybody possesses that. And you have this level of self-awareness that you can say that outwardly and take the steps to correct it. So what do you think about having that ability and using it as a superpower? What do you think of that concept?
Well, I I have always loved the concept of superpowers. Who doesn't want superpowers? But I think of it more as just the skill set that serves everybody the best is a skill set that involves the ability to say that you're sorry, the ability to say that you're wrong, the ability to know when you don't know something and need to talk to somebody else, or, do more research or reframe a question. And, these are not new insights. I imagine they appear in all the leadership literature, although I will be honest with you, I am not a huge consumer of the literature. I get more enjoyment out of the doing of things rather than the thinking about them. But all of these are certainly important for, at least in the position I have now, for leadership in this position, you need to be able to do all those things.
I think that you're such an extraordinary example of a woman that is not only strong, but has humility in her strength, and also has this awareness of knowing that you don't have to sacrifice the things that you don't want to give up. What advice do you have for other women out there that have to make similar choices? Career versus family, and what's the right timing? Because even though I know you didn't plan this by rote, by date, by time, by hour, you did have a purpose and a direction. And I wonder what you would share with those that are sitting in the same position, trying to figure out what the next best move is.
Well, I'll say two things that'll sound contradictory. One is that it can be very helpful to have a long-term goal in mind. There was a time, and I will, tell you, it was a man, not a woman, who put in my head that maybe this would be a good position for me someday. And having that idea in the back of my mind did drive me in some directions a little bit, although I didn't I didn't really change anything I did. I just maybe changed my perspective a little bit. But at the same time, I don't think it helps to sit down and make a rigid 10-year plan. That's not ever going to work for anybody. Life happens. If you focus instead on what your values are, what your personal mission is, not what job title you want to have, but what your personal mission feels like in both your professional and your personal capacities. I think that illuminates some paths that will then seem more natural.
And then you said that you had a second thought that seemed contradictory to the first.
No, it's just, I'm saying have a long-term goal, but don't have like a rigid plan. And then by the time I'm 30, I have to have 2 babies. And then by the time I'm 35, I have to be executive vice president, because that's rarely going to work. And when it does work, you're often going to find yourself at some point in a place going, what have I done? Is this what I really wanted? And we all have friends who have been there, and I recommend, something I have done actually more than once is leave a job without having the next one all lined up. I hope that's becoming more normalized now. I think the pandemic has definitely pushed us to normalize that even a little bit more. It used to be that was like, everyone would tell you that was the worst thing you could possibly do. But value yourself. If you find yourself in a position where you have that slightly nauseous feeling when you go into work in the morning, be as kind to yourself as you would be to a friend who told you about that, and say, hey, that might be a situation that you want to change.
Wow. That's such a powerful statement. And I actually had a similar conversation with a friend yesterday, that we are often so unkind to ourselves that we would never, ever treat our friends the same way we treat ourselves. And maybe we should adopt a little bit of that kindness as we look within. And you saying that out loud, like I said, is such a powerful reminder for me and an inspiration. And I'm so grateful, because I know we're running out of time. I'm so grateful for the time that you've been able to share with me today, especially your willingness to be vulnerable and share those things that we all carry inside, but don't say out loud. And I'm so grateful that you did, that you were brave enough to share that, because it gives me personally that feeling that I'm not alone in these thoughts. And I hope that that gives the audience the same sense of community, that if we just reach out and start talking about these things that we internalize, maybe we won't feel so alone. I want to step back from the mic for just a moment, because I want to give you an open mic to leave the audience with a final lasting thought.
My lasting thought is, I just want to endorse what you just said and talk about how important it is that we have the opportunity to have these conversations on the record, as it were. Your podcast is truly a special opportunity for this kind of engagement. The panel that we met on was a panel as part of a group of women in the mortgage industry who got together when that particular group got started. It was just one woman saying, hey, we really need to have this kind of engagement among ourselves. And she built that into this really tremendous opportunity. And it just says to me, we're all hungering for this kind of engagement, and to make the time and space for it, whether it is in professional panels or in podcasts or in groups within workplaces, it remains extremely important. And I want to, for anybody who's listening and hasn't had the opportunity to be part of that kind of group, I encourage you, seek one out. If there isn't one, see what you can do to create one. We all succeed better by lifting each other up, holding each other up sometimes when necessary, pushing each other when necessary, sometimes holding each other back from something that might be a bad decision. That kind of peer engagement from the people who can really understand what you're going through is so very critical. I know that in my career, engagement with other women is what underpins a lot of my success. I have had almost no success that is just through my own being particularly smart or insightful or anything. It is because I have had a tremendously important, brilliant, wonderful, gorgeous community of women in my professional space as well as my personal space who have helped hold me and promote me and educate me and make me smarter. I am so very grateful to you for having me on the program, and to everybody out there who's listening. We all need to be here for each other.
Julia, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for connecting with me. I'm so grateful. And thank you for being a world changer. We need more people like you. And thank you to all of you for listening. And we'll see you again next time.
This is just the beginning.
That's our show. I am so grateful for each and every one of you and your unwavering support and your continued belief in this movement that has become much bigger than me, much bigger than just a podcast. It has become this forward momentum that we are all doing together. If you are ready, or you know somebody that is ready to tell your story and share your value with the world, please connect with me. You can reach me at audra@womeninthearena.net. I am so honored and thankful that you will share your story with me, and I'll make sure that it is well taken care of. I will never stop thanking each and every one of you, and I cannot wait to talk to you again next week as we share another woman's story and we celebrate her doing extraordinary things in plain sight. We'll see you next time.